How are you?
Hey Jay, how are you? Good.
You're right. Welcome to the Rotary Club at the Grange. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation today given by Ken Miles. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ken?
Let's pray. So I thank you for this day and opportunity to come together to share a meal and fellowship and have a wonderful speaker. Thank you for all those that prepared the food for our bodies. Be with each one here and bless them in all that they do with their family, the church, and businesses, and each other. Be with those that aren't here. May be a special blessing on them, those that aren't well, or those that are traveling. Keep them safe. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for the continuing improvement in the situation. Help us all stay well and have a wonderful holiday season. Pray Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you, Ken. Now to introduce our visitors and guests, I'd like to call Father Vincent.
Good afternoon. So nice to see everyone today. We have two guests. Dante Lane, who is a prospective member, who was proposed by George Bailey, and also a guest of Brandon, Eli. And then we have Matt Bobby, who's a guest of Susan Ferguson. So please help me welcome these people. I'm going to put $2 into the Happy Dollars because I wanted to thank everyone for being so generous. We're still collecting money for the Project North Pole and for the food closet. So you guys are the best, you know that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Barbara. We do have some birthdays and anniversaries. No birthdays actually today, but we do have some member anniversaries. John Asbell, 11 years. Dale Jackson, 4 years. And Tisa Walker, 1 year. So, Tisa Wilder, I'm sorry. I'm skipping ahead. Tisa Wilder, my bad, I'm sorry. And then some wedding anniversaries. Ken and Cheryl Gordon, 32 years on the 9th. John and Diane Harrell, 21 years on the 9th. Shannon and Forrest Johnson, 7 years on the 13th. And Gerald and Wendy Wyatt, 31 years today. So happy anniversaries and now now we just do have a few club announcements before we get to Happy Dollars. First of all, please silence your cell phones before we get started. Thank you to everybody that participated last week in the activities we had in the walking in the parade last Thursday and ringing the bell for the Salvation Army on Saturday. Thank you for that. We still do have a few opportunities available for the holiday seasons. You can still give to support our the Rotary Youth Challenge by giving to the Project North Pole or to the food closet. You can do that by putting an amount on your invoice.
Yes.
For your Rotary. Let Barbara know.
And we'll do that for you.
Or you can Venmo Barbara, or you can give Barbara cash. Right. So if you have the means to do so, please do, so that we can make the holidays good for everybody else as well. I did want to remind everybody, next week, December 16th, the registration prices for the Rotary Convention in Houston increase. So you have till December 15th to get in on the rate that it is right now for the early bird rate to attend if you're thinking about going to Houston for that conference. Next Thursday, it goes up $100 to register. And then we do have one more announcement. Our club activity. A couple weeks ago, we recognized some folks as Paul Harris Fellows that had donated to that, but there's a few people absent. So we have somebody here today that is a Paul Harris Fellow +1. So I'd like to call Connie and Kathy Tilley to come up and present her with her. Okay, I'm sorry. Kathy Howard. But I don't see Kathy. Yeah, I got my buddy here. Is Kathy here?
Yes, she is.
Oh, she had her back. I couldn't see that. I didn't see her. Sorry about that. I'm doing terrible with names today.
Okay, I have a pen though.
So, as a Paul Harris Fellow, we have donated $1,000. This is for Paul Harris +1, which is an additional $1,000 for that foundation that Rotary uses for all of its causes. So, Kathy, thank you so much for doing that. We appreciate everything you're doing. Get a picture? Thank you. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Kathy. We do have some time for Happy Dollars. If anybody wants to put any more into the globe before we get going. All right. Come up here.
Y'all will be happy to know that now that I've turned 65 and have Medicare, and we'll see about my I have 2 happy dollars. A couple of months ago, the LaGrange Symphony made a really, we think, profound decision about something. And last night we announced it at our concert, and since it involves one of our own, I thought I would tell you about it. The public face of a symphony orchestra is always the conductor. And the LaGrange Symphony named the conductor chair the Dr. George and Reverend Helen Henry conductor chair in honor of all that they have both meant, not just George playing, but all that they have both meant, not only to the symphony over the years, but to our community.
Thank you, Raylene. Thank you, George. Anybody else?
I have a $2 bill for my favorite violinist, Dr. George.
with y'all. Now to our program. I'd like to introduce our speaker today. The Mallory Agency was founded in 1907 and is one of the oldest privately held insurance brokers in the country. Matt Mallory serves Mallory Agency as its CEO, responsible for the overall vision, growth, and success of the firm. Matt's the fourth generation of the Mallory Agency. He has served 15 years in property and casualty insurance, primarily in the middle market with clients all across the country. Although most of his work is done in the restaurant space, Matt's clients also represent construction, real estate, retail, cyber risk, as well as clients with larger worker compensation needs. He's a graduate of Valdosta State University. He's involved locally as a member of the LaGrange Gridiron Club, LaGrange Rotary Club, and Young Life of LaGrange. And Matt's also a board member of two local boards, the Mallory Agency, as well as the Downtown LaGrange Development Authority. He serves on 3 statewide boards, the Georgia Restaurant Association, Independent Insurance Agents of Georgia, and Secure Risk Insurance Solutions. Matt is married to Amanda, and together they have 3 wonderful kids, and they attend South Crest Church. Please help me welcome our own Matt Mallory.
Thank you. Mike, no Mike, y'all hear me?
I think,
Yes,
I
no?
think, I think Mike's best for the.
For this?
on the-
All right. Thank you all. It's nice to be back. Nice seeing everybody. We're going to try and make this as interesting as we can with the dim lit room and insurance, so it's not a being the topic of the day. So keep the yawning to a minimum, if you will. For this, it has been a ride. The insurance industry, the last few years. For me, especially since 2018, and then the last couple of years, very, very interesting. And that's why we're going to look at just the risk and the resilience. I used this graphic because it was a bit of a blurry picture, and that's how my head has felt in the last few years. Everything being kind of a blur. So what we're going to try and do is encapsulate a little bit of 16, but really the last couple of years in about 30 minutes. So that's why we're going to take a ride. Next slide. Anyone want to do this again? If we look at the last year, I remember exactly where I was in March of 20 when I got the news that because of this healthcare scare and crisis, everything was stopped, almost immediately shut down. Maybe you remember where you were. It was almost like back in 9/11, where everyone kind of remembers that day. Companies that some of which had absolutely no training and no preparation were forced virtual, were forced in a remote capacity. Some were maybe a little bit ready, mostly they were not. You had a lot of employees that were not prepared by any means to work from home and not knowing what that was going to be like. The property and casualty market was already getting a little hard, and we'll talk about what that means for an insurance cycle, and everything certainly is cyclical with our industry. The pandemic accelerated the hardening of that market dramatically. The big $1 million question, right? Why was for any business owner, property owner, anyone that has purchased commercial property insurance or commercial insurance really in general, why was my business interruption claim not paid? Business interruption is a pretty terrible name for the insurance policy. We'll talk about that a lot, or maybe just a little bit actually. And then business income and business interruption, they're interchangeable. And we will, I'll share with you why there was a big stink, really, not to use the most eloquent word, but it truly is what it became. And then hurricane, forest fires, everything, and a partridge in a pear tree, because we just want to keep it holiday related. You know, the business interruption part of it, the reason it became so upsetting for commercial lines buyers of insurance is they're buying into a policy that says my business has been interrupted. But the reason behind the name being so poor as far as what it was constructed has nothing to do as far as outside forces interrupting the business, but it had everything to do with direct physical damage onto a commercial property. You had a lot of attorneys that were trying to force a square peg in a round hole in a legal argument and taking a little bit more of a moral and an emotional argument of, well, because the insurance companies have the money, it's a bit obligatory for them to pay the claim, which is a little bit of irony for an attorney making an emotional argument. But what they had forgotten was an insurance policy is a contract. It is a risk transfer mechanism, it's a contract, and contracts typically do not include emotions. And so we had to stick to what the contract said, being direct physical damage. Next slide. I hope everyone can see it. I wanted to make the graphic as clear as we could. In 2020, something that's interesting, according to the National Weather Service, I think is their official term, we had more hurricanes in 2020 than the last 4 years combined. And of these hurricanes, all of those were Cat 3 and above. What's Cat 3? Cat 3 is, or are, winds of 110 miles an hour and above. So if we look back, and if we look back to maybe 16, so what, 5 years, almost 6 years now, you had maybe 6, 7 storms that were 100 miles an hour and above in their violence and their aggressiveness, very destructive to property. And all of this directly impacts two things from a property insurance perspective: your homeowner's rates, your homeowner's insurance cost, and commercial property cost. Don't know how, don't know why, but Mother Nature must have sent us a message, because all of these, again, were the biggest ones. The reason for how it affects everything, even when we in our immediate community may not be directly hit, which has happened a few times, but not very much historically, the insurance companies are also under reinsurance treaties for solvency. All insurance companies, at least for property and casualty, want to have a great financial rating. And most all use basically the sheriff, which is AM Best. So any of our banking friends in the room, if they want to get a certificate of insurance from you, and on the insurance company, you don't see an A Best at least from AM Best, they don't want it. So you want to have at least that. So these insurance companies were all hit so much for paying out claims. So if you noticed in the past, anything homeowner related outside of inflation, or if you're a building owner, business owner, and you noticed property insurance rates going up, but you may not have incurred any loss or had any kind of damage, these insurance companies are having to press down rate. Civil and social unrest. On top of the storms, the picture selected, I mean, just to be candid with everybody, when you look at civil and social unrest, there's so many disturbing images that they were just not in line with the four-way test. That's why I didn't show them. Property, especially close to home, and by close to home, I'm referencing primarily Atlanta. With all the civil and the social unrest, there were so many buildings that were severely damaged. Regardless of the motive, they were damaged. You have to remember from a property insurance underwriter what that looks like. When you're in a global pandemic and everyone's holding their breath, and then you see something like this take place, and underwriting does not know why it's going on, because there's too many sound bites, too many opinions, why it's going on, when is it going to stop, and until it stops, how extensive is the damage going to become? They get nervous, wouldn't you? So they either pulled away from a lot of opportunities to underwrite a risk, or if they didn't pull away from it, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, they dramatically started to increase their cost to insure their risk. So you saw property increase the last few years, especially with the pandemic, take off to the tune of, on the low side, 20 to 25% year over year in renewals. Now, some companies, that's just nothing to them. A lot of companies, that's a lot. And when they have to insure the risk, that becomes problematic. When we went through, and I know I'm speaking more on 2020 than anything else, but just wanted to kind of bring some clarity, because there was so much, again, noise and just what about, how can we? What COVID did and what the pandemic really did is it exposed some companies. I don't mean exposed and they were necessarily awful or bad business leaders, but you had a lot of companies on small, middle, and large scale were exposed from poor money management, bad business practices, bad business decisions, private and public. There's a bit of misinterpretation. I would argue that bigger is always better. Well, maybe not, because there's a lot of these boards out there that were maybe not aware or were aware of some of the decisions that were being made. And there's an expression sometimes used, when the tide goes out, you see who's naked. And from a fiscal perspective, some of these companies went to bankruptcies because of bad money decisions, which leads directly to, so how does, and these are just two that I did some research on, how does that situation affect the traditional buyer of professional liability or directors and officers liability, employee practices liability from a commercial lines perspective? You have underwriters seeing this happen more and more and more, and they start to wonder again, well, if it happened to this company, and underwriters, yes, they do look at the glass half empty, and they're just always like misery loves company. They're always wanting to know what's the next worst thing that's going to happen, okay? Which is so much fun when you're talking to them. They're wondering, well, if we don't know what's going to happen, we're seeing a lot of concern in the market for how companies are operating and responding to one of the largest crises in modern history. We're either going to pull out, exit the market, or we're going to charge you a lot more premium to cover our bases. Because again, solvency, making sure that their loss ratios are carefully watched, and then the reinsurance treaties too. All of that comes into a calculation that sometimes does not benefit the client. Good news is not always doom and gloom. If any of you drove around during 20 or maybe some this year, earlier part of this year, especially maybe the Atlanta area or any other city, the roads were pretty quiet. No one was driving around. Everybody was on shelter in place and lockdown, shutdown. How many other expressions can we use to describe what took place? So auto insurance companies try to reward a little bit to the client. No one, I don't think, got a check, which is always more fun, but credits towards your personal auto insurance. Probably 85% of the, or 90% of the market for personal auto insurance offer credits. You may have seen it, you may have not, just depends on what your personal account looks like. With homeowners, with all the storms that took place, there was less effect, mainly because there was a lot more new construction, surprisingly, because people were wanting to pull the Home Depot commercial. Right? You can do it, we can help. People were doing a lot of improvements to their home. Well, underwriters love seeing that. They love to see, hey, you know, before we send any kind of loss control or risk control out there to your home, what are you doing to help mitigate the risk and betterments and improvements? So you probably saw, you know, inflation, you can always maybe expect 2 to 3% increase, and just overall. With the pandemic and we're trying to come out of this thing, you're probably seeing between a 5 to 7% potential increase in what you're paying in your homeowners rates. And I can share a little bit if anyone wants to on, is that controlled? Can you control that at all besides getting too quote happy on things? Is there a way to do it? And there are some ways to control that. On the auto side, you should have seen that auto has also been stabilized. Insurance companies are liking seeing the increase in the electronic or the electric car, the idea of that. What they did see a lot on the auto side was more accidents than ever. And unfortunately, a lot of fatalities on the road because people saw lanes like this and they said, to heck with 70 miles an hour, I'm gonna go 90. And that ended up being a lot of accidents. I mentioned hard market a little bit. So I started in this business back in 2007. We were very much in a soft market. I'm just gonna do a little bit of a compare and contrast of the two different ones. So right now being a hard market, non-renewals. Well, why in the world would I get non-renewed outside of maybe not paying my premium? Well, non-renewals mainly comes from some of these insurance companies, again, wanting to exit the market. And by market, I mean insuring whatever you do or whatever you are in, okay? They are getting out from either loss ratios, paying out a lot of money, Or from either a corporate perspective, from a shareholder perspective, from a board of director perspective, they're saying, we're scared, we're concerned, we're nervous. Our appetite for risk is like this big, maybe this broad. We want to shrink that, sometimes by 2/3, and only focus right here. And it just so happens, coincidentally, this focus right here, we're more profitable. Less capacity. Similar to the non-renewal, a lot of our carriers, I'll give you one in particular that we've seen this. Zurich is a name that's big name, usually well known. Zurich has done more of significant pivots and changes that I've seen compared to other markets in the sense of backing away way more than others while they were still profitable, but they just did not want to take any chances. And Zurich's appetite was very broad. And they, on the broker side for us, we didn't get much notice. And so of course, we're getting client calls asking us, why am I getting non-renewal notices and what's going on? And Zurich would not give any kind of heads up or any kind of really detail other than hard market, less capacity, loss ratios are going up, we're pulling out. Increased cost affects everybody. And it's tough to always have a good or creative or spin tactic answer. Sometimes you just gotta say, yeah, you know what? You didn't do anything to get this. It's a tough deal right now. The market's a little bit sideways. We can do everything we can to try and help negotiate the cost. Keep in mind, in personal insurance, the rates are not locked in, but the reason that we have to go to so many different underwriting companies is in personal insurance, the rates are non-negotiable. Commercial lines, you've got negotiating power, terms and conditions both. In personal lines, you can endorse policies for maybe glass breakage on your vehicle. That's an endorsement. For commercial lines, you'd have way more endorsement and negotiation power. But everything also comes with sometimes a bit of a cost. Increased placement into the surplus lines. Insurance jargon. Stick with me on this if you can, because I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this, because no one wants to be too much in the weeds. Usually, a lot of these carriers that we're working with are direct relationships from us. Okay, if we can visualize this and picture this. I'm going to toss out some names you're going to know. A Travelers, a Liberty Mutual, a Chubb. Those are all names, yes, that we know maybe. Those are all some of these direct relationships. With the pandemic, when it struck, and still trying again to come out of this, what we've seen these insurance companies doing is as they pull out, those risks 2 years ago are great for the standard and direct market, but the direct market doesn't want them. So we have to pivot and go into the surplus lines market. But what does that mean for the client? It means for the client, the terms and conditions sometimes are less aggressive and competitive, as is the cost, and you're going to pay a finance fee because you're going to have to finance the policy. Why? Any direct relationship, any direct market out there is going to give you some kind of installments, payment installments. I'm sure everyone's probably experienced something like that. And the surplus lines market, because it's a little bit more high risk, they will not allow installments. It's either pay it in full or we're going to finance it to the tune of 7 to 9, sometimes 12%, which is more money. So this is the cycle. Can I walk away from this to point some things up there? Is that okay? If you can look up here, the font is so small, and I'm sorry about that. But where you see the arrows, those aren't quick hits. Those are probably, as the arrows go clockwise, maybe about 5 to 15 years on average is how long it takes to transition from phase to phase. So the top is the hard market right now, and it is more expensive. On the bottom is the soft market. I hate using the word cheap, but that's just user-friendly, and that's what it is. So right now where we are is that top area where it says hard market. We are trying to get over that hump to where it says on the top right, which I know is almost impossible to read from that back of the room, it says insurers chase market share. They are not chasing market share right now, not even a little bit. So we're probably the top left, top center of this market. But what's interesting to watch is when you do see one or two from a personal insurance perspective or commercial, it's kind of like a domino effect, but it's not literally as quick as when you thump a domino. And you start to see the insurance companies chase market share, you see rates coming down, and you'll start to notice it as if you are getting pricing on whatever you insure, you're going to start to see it a little bit more and more. And it's just the cyclical thing where it happens it takes sometimes 5 to 15 years. I remember if I came in 07 to this business, I think maybe by between 2010 and 2012, it started to firm up a little bit. And then we entered the hard market maybe around 16 to 18, and then kaboom, COVID enters our lives. And we're, again, trying to come out of that right now. Next slide. Some trends, equally itty bitty font, okay? So this is looking from Q2 of 20 to Q2 of 21. All right, so we're looking at this bit of a span. So the top, if you're doing some quick math, it's about a 15% increase, which is the floor that we're seeing actually right now. This is from one of our partners we pulled this information from. All of these lines are steadily kind of coming down, but it's not nearly as rapid as we need it for the consumer and for the client. And this does go over specifically for commercial lines because your personal insurance was not as greatly affected by the pandemic compared to business risk. So what can we forecast out for the next year? I think for your personal insurance, you're going to see it more stabilized. Insurance rates certainly should, assuming you're not a lead-foot driver and more aware. Homeowner costs should stabilize as well. Ways for anyone in this room to try and capture whatever kind of cost you can back. You can do little small things, simple things, raise your deductible. So a lot of the stuff that I'm sure all of you know. Insurance companies love new construction. So do contractors right now. There are a few small things you can do to help out with your insurance cost. If you've got little small things, betterments, improvements to your home, and just the stuff that we all know a little bit. On the commercial side, I'm seeing that I would forecast the property rate starting to flatten out Q2, Q3 for next year. Now this, when I reference Q2 and Q3, I'm looking at a calendar fiscal. Okay, so January 1 to December 31. Casualty rates are going to struggle to come down a little bit less. Why? Why would casualty respond differently than property? Casualty is going to respond differently than property because we live in maybe the most litigious society ever. Everyone is looking for a lawsuit, and the lawsuits, everything from, and right or wrong, lawsuits we're seeing from discrimination, harassment, wrongful terminations, poor money management from a board of directors. Board of directors, insurance directors, and officers is really just managerial malpractice. Is what it is. So watching how these companies are responding. Workers' compensation is a casualty product. You're going to see a lot more workers' compensation trying to stabilize. We had some COVID cases, but mainly it is employers that aren't following through or in putting into place safety and compliance programs for their teams. So you're going to see the casualty lines struggle a little bit to come down. And this is all assuming no tornadoes, no hurricanes, no global crisis for health, which no social and civil unrest. Is that naive? Well, of course, a little bit, but the main reason I wanted to walk through some of the maybe unexpected reasons for this insurance stuff in the last couple of years is I wanted to bring some awareness to how quickly and directly the insurance marketplace can be affected for the client. The clients usually, and they're not supposed to know everything. It's usually just, why am I paying so much? Fix it. This gives a little more clarity maybe to how that equation happens. So that's what I have with 8 minutes to spare. Did I do okay? All right. Any questions? Oh, hands going up, yes.
Yeah. I'm very hopeful that the Braves will re-sign Freddie Freeman. And if they do, and they pay him $150 million over however many years, you would do, are athletic contracts like that typically insured to cover it if the guy unfortunately gets injured and can't play?
You can insure anything. and usually through the Lloyd's markets, and they're very expensive. So yes,
But it does, it's kind of routine, as we say.
well, insuring a contract, yes, but more importantly, what they could even do is they could insure something that's very important about him to the organization. So yes, but it's expensive. It's very expensive. All those policies are manuscripted.
Explain why the insurance companies are so excited about electric vehicles.
Well, because the maintenance is a lot less right now for the electric vehicles, because what we're seeing, what we're reading is outside of the maintenance of the battery itself, there's less maintenance to the car compared to what we call combustion, a term I learned when I was at a recent meeting. Maintenance to the vehicle, wear and tear on the vehicle, accidents to the vehicles. It's interesting how the ownership of the electric vehicles are just babied a little bit more than combustion vehicles. It's an interesting dynamic we're seeing right now.
Has there been any discussion in what's going to happen with homeowner rates, really for landlords? I'm seeing in the real estate market is there's going to be a huge increase in renter occupied properties, single family renter occupied properties. So like full subdivisions are all renter occupied. And then how that, because renters usually are not as careful in making sure, that there's not deferred maintenance or water leaks or whatever else they're going for longer. And how that's going to carry over and probably affect all homeowners.
May have to get back to you on that.
Can you speak a moment about, that might be your area, about cyber risk?
Yeah, absolutely.
Related to small businesses?
So cyber is huge right now, and several things, including cyber, I could have probably packed into this. So cyber right now is probably one of the loudest talking points in property and casualty. If you are a business of any size, you need to have a standalone cyber policy just because of the number of breaches that we are seeing. Cyber criminals have quadrupled times 10. Breaches are happening through the most bizarre places on earth. Used to, people could get from Staples your Norton antivirus software, put it on your laptop, on your desktop, feel a little bit warm and fuzzy that you're safe. And that's just not the case anymore. So that is probably the only market segment where there's capacity is cyber liability right now. I'll tell you that one of the reasons that cyber criminals are having fun. For payment, they like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. The reason they like it is not regulated, and trying to determine the exact calculation of it is almost impossible. US dollar is easily regulated, and you can approximate and calculate it quickly. It's not the same with Bitcoin. So if they come to you and they try to hack into your system, A, you're not guaranteed to get your information back that's not encrypted. And you may not get all your information back, period. And whatever kind of cryptocurrency they're looking for, you really don't know what you even paid. So a lot of these different companies that we've seen in the past, the scare or the hysteria has been the large clients, the Home Depots, the Targets, the Equifaxes that go back to the early 2010s, right? And a lot of the businesses out there, they're smaller than publicly traded, thinking, I don't need that, they can't find me. They know where you sleep. They will find you. I mean, that's just how serious these guys get. I'll give you a story on how they get into a network and how they can get into an organization. We heard a story of a claim where there was a breach, all information on the internal system was scrambled. There was a smart refrigerator in the kitchen or the break room of the company. This company was 500 employees, all on site. The chief administration officer had her corporate email account on Alexa that was on the smart refrigerator. The cyber criminal, the breacher, hacks in through the network, through the IT infrastructure to the refrigerator, accesses her corporate email address, gets to her desktop, gets access for the entire company payroll and everything else, blasts out a phishing email asking for information and money, gift cards, etc., takes down the entire IT infrastructure, all by breaching into a smart refrigerator in the break room. Now that sounds made for TV, doesn't it? Like NCIS kind of stuff, and it's happening all the time.
So to piggyback off of the cyber, one of the things we're seeing a lot is not so much hacking, but the frivolous lawsuits based on, like I said, there's some circuit in New York that's won a lawsuit against a website for an ABA. And not the big like Target lawsuit, but a small company that technically wouldn't fall under the ABA in Georgia, but in a small district in New York, they did. So I'm seeing like a dozen of my friends get lawsuits, just, forward letters.
Right.
Is that this protection against that kind of frivolous lawsuit, a product that you guys are looking into covering? And what do you, it seems like that lawsuit manufacturing farm kind of thing where they find a loophole and they get a case that they win and then they just start, going out and looking for hundreds and hundreds of people to sue. It's really becoming more prevalent.
Well, they do that, but also, so yes, the answer to your question is yes. To fill a gap in both of the answers, when a breach occurs, the reason that it is concerning more than maybe a property claim or general liability loss is how you have to respond. You have to think about it. All breaches are electronic or they're digital. So when you get breached, let's just take a law firm, okay? Let's say that you've got a law firm that maybe has middle in size. If they are breached, law firms have sensitive client information, client-attorney privilege, right? Not only do they have to notify every client in writing by U.S. mail, and usually by certified U.S. mail, every state has different federal requirements and state requirements to notify the client that have to be complied with. So if you're in Georgia, it's easy, one state, two requirements, federal and state, right? But if you're multi-state in scope, you have to send those out, and that is before you bring in a forensics team to really accurately determine what took place, when it happened, because you have to include that in your communications with the client. This happened, this is what we're going to do about it. And all has to happen through U.S. mail. Makes sense. You can't send out an email to a client saying we got breached, do it. Right? So I know I'm over. Any other questions? Thank you all.
Thank you, Matt. That gave us all a lot to keep us awake and at night, not just during your presentation. So, thank you very much. It was good to see you. Thanks for coming back. Next week is our last meeting of the year. We will have our board meeting after next week's meeting. Next week, the Nature Conservancy will be here to talk to us about dam removals, small dam removals, which should be pretty interesting to see how it affects our fishing around here. Then next week is the 15th, and then we're off the next 2 weeks for the holidays. So we'll be halfway through the year. If there's nothing else, we stand adjourned. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm interested in that one, for sure. See what's happening.